Hey guys, Happy New Year, and I hope 2019 is good to you. Um, right, so in October I started a bit of a playlist that I was going to call Integration. And since then I've been really busy, long hours, long weeks. I haven't really had time to make videos. So it sort of stalled over the harvest in the wheat belt here. So October, November, December I was pretty busy. I didn't put any videos out since October. But with that time on the header, you get a lot of time to think, and I've changed my mind on how I'm going to present this playlist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reshoot the intro here, explaining what this whole playlist is trying to achieve. I'll rename the old intro and move it down to the bottom of the playlist. And yeah, I'll just keep going, and I'll name things appropriately and slowly add videos to it. So yep, if you're interested, you can subscribe, and of course you can find the playlist from the channel and kick off where you left off anytime. Yep, so let me just give you a bit of background. What I'm doing is, on the header I was listening to a fair bit of YouTube videos and podcasts, and then I started reading Northrop Frye's Fearful Symmetry, and he talks a lot about how important William Blake's theory of knowledge is in his whole worldview. And I sort of had a list of videos that I wanted to go through that I thought I'd put into a good order. And I sort of looked, and there was a batch of videos I wanted to do in the middle, right in the middle, that were what would be my theory of knowledge videos. So I thought, well, actually, Frye is right. These are like central. These have actually got to come first, and it's like the first realizations I had in my early 20s, and it's the stuff I put into that book I wrote called A Fool's Folly. I say a book I wrote a book, but it's not published, so it's not, you won't find it on Amazon. I might try and get that up on Amazon, but yeah. So I sort of realized that those have got to come first, and then I sort of realized that I could use the categories of culture, nature, and consciousness a lot better than I was using them, where I was just mixing them back and forth. And I sort of realized actually there's like an order you put onto your consciousness first, and then you deal with nature, and then you deal with culture, and then of course the whole thing is to get more and more those separate bits of order explained and related to each other more and more integrated, and that's why I call it integration. Right, so let's just move over to some slides and I'll kick off this intro. Righto. So one thing that's always a constant, that's always going to be there, that we're always going to have to deal with, is the unknown. It's the chaos, broadly speaking. And what we want to do is we want to pull some order out of there, so that we can sort of act in the world, get things done, meet people, so on and so forth, predict the future, and hopefully it's not a false order, so that we make terrible predictions that actually hurt us. And I think there's three broad categories of order. And what I mean is, if you go into a bookstore, the non-fiction section, there are going to be books dealing with consciousness, with nature, and with culture. Like you can't change your consciousness, I'm afraid. No amount of idealism can change the way your consciousness works. And people are the same with consciousness, but of course the decisions they make change the way they are situated. And like I was saying, the first kind of order you can pull out, or that you really want to pull out, is consciousness, an order that explains your consciousness in relation to chaos. Because once you do that, the problem where people fail with this is that they are objective. So they set some goals and they say those are objective, and then as soon as their subjectivity is contrary to that, where it's then procrastinating, they struggle to work towards their goals, and so on and so forth. The subjectivity is treated like an illusion, and that there's nothing in it, and it's just something to overcome through sheer attitude, kind of thing. So you've got to get that straight first, because once you get that straight, there's like a dance between subjectivity and objectivity that leads to more knowledge and more order as just a sort of way of being. You don't actually have to drive it, with any conscious effort. It's an unconscious drive. And then once you're doing that, you're pulling a bit of order out of the chaos to explain nature. And nature are those impersonal things that there's a reason they're the way they are, and you can't really change them, and you can understand them. And of course, I don't want to go and say you can't change nature, because this is the whole thing with being human, as we can, but we've got to prioritize understanding it, and then you can try change it, of course, but you want to understand things. You don't want to be railing against nature, sort of, especially nature that can't change. Same applies to culture. And of course, we want to integrate these things. We want an understanding of consciousness and nature and culture at the same time. And of course, there's going to be aspects of life where we're going to have a conscious order and a natural order, and we're going to be missing the cultural order. Right? So let me go through a few examples. So the first example would be somebody who's got the thing with these different categories of order that you apply in life is they make, integration gets easier and easier. All right? So if you've got an order, it's easier to pull out another set of order out of the chaos, especially if it works. If it doesn't work, it's just confusing. It's just more chaos. But if you've got an order that explains your consciousness and nature, and of course explains how supernature works and things like that, it's much easier to then understand culture. But at the beginning, it's tough, and this is, somebody's got a bit of order that explains a little bit of life, but there's just an overwhelming amount of chaos. And that for me is like the depressed barista who hates his job, and he's a socialist. And he doesn't like people because, he's a socialist because he thinks economics, which is in the category of nature, could be radically different if only, then you jump into the category of culture, if only people weren't trying to keep the downtrodden down. And so now, this lack of order has just created chaos where he just sees himself as a exploited person and the class of people as the exploiters. Right, so if you can manage to understand your consciousness and you get into that state where you gain knowledge without any drive, you don't have to study, and it's not like you have to sit and force yourself to study. It's just a way of being where you pick up a book because you want to know something, or you read an article online or you watch YouTube videos because you sort of got a question and you need an answer, but it's not consciously driven. It's not through a to-do list. It just happens. Once you do that, you're going to be able to put order onto more of that chaos a lot more easily. And so this, for me, an example would be an artist, say a guitarist in a band, does it for a living, and would just be the kind of person who's just gaining knowledge about art and about his craft and things related to that, but still doesn't have an explanation for nature and for culture. So he's still probably, socialist. That's what I say. He's still a socialist, still thinks the nature of economics can just be overturned if the culture of the people was changed. And so this is the kind of person who's always trying to change everybody's mind. If I can just change enough people's minds, we'll get somewhere. And of course, that never happens. The next example is, say, somebody who doesn't have an order explaining culture. This would be, like the libertarian, somebody who's got a thirst for knowledge, who understands nature. So say even the nature of economics, well, this is the example, has an explanation of economics and understands the nature of economics, and that you can't just write into your constitution that housing is a human right, and suddenly houses fall from the sky and everybody's got a nice house, right? He understands that that's not how that works. But of course, he's also troubled by culture because, he wants to use the understanding of economics, the nature of economics, and just bring that into politics so that he doesn't have to go and find a whole explanation for culture and why politics is different to economics. So he tries to bring that in, and he joins the Libertarian Party, and the party only gets 3% of the vote. And then of course he's looking at the Republican Party, and he's going, but you guys don't understand economics. So why are you getting all the votes? And it's because politics is playing a much bigger game than economics is. So like you can see, once you get there, maybe you'll only be in the Libertarian Party for 2 years, and then it'll dawn on you, a few realizations will just come to you naturally through your consciousness, that fact that you're gaining knowledge without much conscious drive, and yeah, you'll start thinking about culture, and you'll start putting out a bit of order that explains culture and overlaying that onto these other sets of categories of order, right? Because there's going to be a lot of things where we have an explanation, a natural explanation, and maybe a conscious explanation, but not a cultural explanation, right? Because life is broad. So what you want to do is you want to get more integrated. Sorry, I just sort of played with that earlier. Oh, yep. Don't know how I played with it though. No. Anyway, point is, we want to get more integrated. Boom. But of course you want more order in these categories. You want the amount of order to increase as well, right? So it's a game of increasing the order that explains these three categories of chaos, and you want them to integrate more and more. And of course the chaos isn't going anywhere, guys. It's part of life. And of course you'd be happy that it was, because if you got to some point and everything was explained, well, what's left to do but to die? Right. So what I'm going to do in this playlist is I'm going to have 3 series of sufficient arguments. And what I mean by sufficient argument isn't that it's an exhaustive argument. Right? If I'm making an argument to try and convince somebody down here, there's always going to be somebody up there going, oh well, that doesn't explain everything. And it's like, well, of course. And an effective truth argument, I don't think this is a technical term. I got the idea of effective truth from somebody talking about Machiavelli. And his point was, some things are effectively true, which means they probably don't fit in your worldview or your ideals, contradicts your ideals. So it's easy to just say, to reject it, but at some point you've got to say, well, it's effectively true, therefore there probably is an explanation, and therefore I've got to try and find that explanation over time. Now, all I'm saying here is, I don't want to make arguments that are too far away from people, so that they just look at things and go, no, that contradicts my ideals. And I don't want to make things that aren't exhaustive enough. So my point is, if you're watching this, you're going to probably find things that are maybe that you don't agree with because they contradict your ideals, or they're not exhaustive enough. But the point is, I'm making a series of these, so it'll be the next sufficient argument might be more exhaustive. This is just meant to be a very thin skeleton of my worldview. And of course this is useful for, it's useful for me to do, but it's also useful to have on YouTube, because there's always people you meet who you can sort of chat to, and you get into a bit of disagreement, and it can be useful to just say, oh well, watch from 2.7 to 3.2, and they can give you some stuff, and you go and you chat, and you realize there's more to it or whatever, and you build onto your worldviews. So I'm going to try and make a series of of sufficient arguments so that they're not leaving people to just, contradict their ideals, but it's also become more exhaustive. And there's going to be 3 of these series. So the first one I'll number with 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, and so on. That'll be consciousness. 2 will be nature. 3 will be culture. You'll see how, culture is an integration of nature and consciousness with that category. I might, do a series 4.0, talk about integration. And there might be things in there like talking about supernature, which is in the religious realm, but you need explanations for things that you can't explain other ways. Righto, so hope that wasn't too long. Thanks for watching and see you later.